Hey guys, and welcome to the 2025 March Madness special that we do every year here on Watch Out. I am your host, Pizzulo, and this year we're putting a special twist on our March Madness bracket episode. These are going to be the watch brands that are most seen in Chinatown in New York City. I recently went last month with my friend Dave off to Chinatown, which I used to do with my former partner Jared all the time to figure out which brands are in New York City of the replicas. That's what Chinatown is known for. That's why we go in there to get replica brands. A lot of people do it. And I want to give you a preview since I went to about 15 or 16 stores to find out what the in brands are and what some of the former brands that used to be there really aren't there at this point, because Chinatown is a revolving door. If you have been there before, what's in this year or what's in today is not necessarily going to be in there tomorrow or next year. Times change, brands change, and overall things just change. And Chinatown is a perfect example of that on how things change overall. And this is what the bracket episode is going to be about. So the top Chinatown brands that are currently there in 2025. Let's get started over here with the top hand of the bracket over here, which is Patek against Michael Kors. Now, this one is pretty easy. As much as people would like to think that Michael Kors is a big brand in Chinatown, it's not. So there's a ton of Patek Philippe watches down there. You would think there wouldn't be, because you would think Patek would have more of a market on trying to curb the replicas that are out on the Chinatown market, but they're really not. There's a ton of them. Every store I went to had about 20 to 30 Patek watches, all different models, all different colors. I saw nothing of Michael Kors, even though it is a fashion, trendy brand. Still, it is dying really quickly in the watch market. They are hardly any player anymore. That's why they're an 8 seed on this bracket. So, obviously, Patek is going to move on in this bracket. Okay, let's go to the number 4 against the number 5 seed, Gucci against Seiko. Now, this one gets obviously very interesting, because Gucci was one of the main players and main brands if you went to Chinatown in the late 1990s to early 2000s. Seiko is always around in every marketplace and every brand. So this was a pretty good matchup. When I went there and pretty much saw for myself what was currently there, I did see a little bit of Seiko and not that much of Gucci. If this would have been 10, 15 years ago, Gucci would have won this matchup. But since Gucci has really fallen out of favor in Chinatown, it is Seiko that does move on to the next round, as I did see some Seiko knockoffs. Not very good ones, but cheap ones in the $10, $20 range. Let's go to the 3 against the 6 seed, Omega versus Timex. Now, Omega used to be a huge player in Chinatown 8, 10, 12 years ago. You don't see a ton of it now. The only way I did find 1 or 2 dealers who had Omegas, they were in the back. You had to go through a bag, and that's usually how they did it back then. And it's the old way of doing it. So they would bring out 1 or 2. They brought out a Seamaster. They brought out a Constellation. 1 or 2 here or there. But in terms of Timex, even though it's very easy to rip off, you would think they would be in Chinatown for $5, $10. They aren't. They're not there at all. The real ones are, but I'm talking about replicas. And since this March Madness episode is about replicas, that's not even in play. Even though there are replicas of Timex, they aren't there. Omega does move on barely with the hard-to-get ones, but they still move on to the next round. Richard Mille against Casio, 2 versus 7 seed. Very interesting matchup also, because there are some high-end Richard Mille watches that are there. I did find a couple of brands that did have them. And in terms of Casio, you would most likely find replicas of G-Shocks if you were to find them. And I did find one or two dealers that had that as well. But since they're going towards the really high-end market, like level 5 type watches in Chinatown, they're really not playing towards the market they used to currently. So Richard Mille does move on to the next round because there just weren't enough G-Shocks out there. Let's go to the other side of the bracket. Okay, now you have Audemars Piguet, okay, against Invicta. Now, this is something you say, well, would you be able to see Invicta in this market? Yes, and it's usually not the replicas. Oh, Lord. It's the real ones, and you would be able to see them, but you wouldn't be able to see them against the Audemars Piguet. There are so many AP watches, and I want to tell you, it's like Patek. They went gangbusters, and the AP watches were absolutely off the charts in terms of how many I saw. So it didn't matter how many Invictas were there, the APs would overwhelm them. So AP does move on to the next chapter. On to the next segment, the 4 seed against the 5 seed, which is Frank Mueller against Tissot. Again, you would think Tissot might have a chance against Frank Mueller here because it's affordable, you can knock it off easily, especially some of their popular lines that have come out in the recent years. They're just not there, guys. They're just not in Chinatown. Frank Mueller is in Chinatown, and there are quite a few of them. I went at least 7 or 8 places had Frank Mueller, the bigger type watches, and even though he's a high-end designer, they're still carrying him. They like the oversized watches still in Chinatown. It must sell pretty well. So Frank Mueller is moving on to the next round. And let's go to the next one. Vacheron against Citizen. Again, you would think Citizen would be there. The real ones are, but we're not talking about the real ones in Chinatown in terms of knockoffs on what's really there. But I guess you could. It's really hard to rip off or remake a Citizen. There are some Citizens in Chinatown. So when I really think about it, with Timex and Citizen, I guess you really can't even say the knockoffs, just judging by the real things. There were the real things there, but not a lot of them. There were some, maybe 4 or 5 stores I went to out of the 15, so that's 1/3 of the stores. But Vacheron, there was, in about 7 or 8 stores, there were Vacheron right next to the Frank Mueller and the Patek and the APs. So they have a lot of Vacherons still. Now, they're not automatics, they're quartz. Obviously, they're fake. But they're still there, and apparently they do still sell. So they're one of the popular brands in Chinatown right now. So Vacheron does move on to the next round as well. Here's the interesting one. The last one, Rolex against Movado. Now, Rolex, if this were 10, 15 years ago, this wouldn't even be a Rolex would just cruise to the finals and win. That's not the way Chinatown has shaped up when it comes to Rolex. Rolex has kind of gone underground when it comes to Chinatown. You can't put them out in the stores. You can't put them out in the display cases. There's been several New York City raids that have done raids on specifically Rolex because Rolex is very particular against replicas being sold in the public. So they've gone through these things called catalogs, and the vendors will call you over and ask you what you're looking for, and you say Rolex, and then basically they will give you a booklet. And in the booklet, there are all the various types of Rolexes, the Submariners, the Speedmasters, Datejust, literally every type of Rolex you could get your hands on. And they are in the booklets, which are then put in the back. So They have to go to the back of the store and get your specific one. They're not out in the display cases, but they are there. They used to be all over the place. Now they're underground, but they still make them. Okay, so you got to realize that. And in terms of Movado, okay, Movado, if this was 10, 15 years ago, even 20 years ago, all over the place. I used to go and they were all over the place. Swiss Army, Movado, Cartier, all over the place. Non-existent. I did not see one in 15 stores. So obviously Rolex moving on to the next round due to that. Okay, so back over to this side. Okay, so Patek against Seiko. Again, not really much of a thing here. I told you Patek is all over the place. Big ones, small ones, automatics, you name it. The Nautilus, all over the place. The new versions, the old versions, they have them in black, they have them in steel, they have them in gold, they have them literally ceramic, all over the place. So when it comes between these two, Patek moving on. Omega against Richard Mille. Okay, this is a very close battle over here in terms of what I had found. And I still found a little bit more Omega than I had Richard Mille, okay? Because at the end of the day, Omega is the bigger name, and they still can have some older models. Off to the other side over here. AP against Frank Mueller. Now, like I said, there were a nice number of Frank Muellers there, but not when it comes to AP. AP, my God. And they are expensive, okay? The APs there are ranging from anywhere between $280 to $480. So, but apparently people are buying them because they got literally every model and color of AP that you can imagine. AP moving on. Vacheron against Rolex. Okay, so even though there are Vacherons in the display cases, again, you can get Rolex underground. They're just not going to be out in the display cases, but they are there, and I did see quite a few sellers selling Rolex. Even though this is pretty close because there were quite a number of Vacherons. There's more models that you can get still of Rolex, even though they're underground, than there are of Vacherons, because there's no automatic Vacheron that you can get in Chinatown, only quartz. So, that being said, Rolex, moving on. So, when you get to the final four, okay, you basically have Patek, AP, Omega, and Rolex in this March Madness bracket that we have in Chinatown. These still are the four most popular brands in Chinatown overall. Let's get to the Omega Rolex lineup over here. Again, Rolex underground, everything's still there. Omega, there, but almost discarded. The Omegas I found weren't working right. They were old. They weren't the desired models like the Speedmaster or the Seamaster. I think we had one Seamaster here and there, but they weren't the new models that people love to get of Omega Constellations, the new ones out with the ceramic ones, all the stuff that you can get online you can't get in Chinatown anymore. And like I said, Rolex is still there, you just got to get them through a catalog. So Rolex, moving on to the finals of the Chinatown bracket. And between Patek and AP, this is a really, really close one. Because both of these deserve to be in the finals if this were done a different way, because they are literally the top two brands out there that are in the display case. But if I had to choose between the two of these, you're going to see more Patek than you did even AP. Not in all 15 stores had Patek, all 15 stores had AP. But there were more of Patek than AP available, especially with the new lines coming out and the new designs, as opposed to AP, which they only had their standard line. So because of that, you're going to go with Patek here against Rolex, okay, which has been a constant mainstay of Chinatown. Overall, in terms of, now you have to really in order to choose the winner of this, you're underground versus above ground. That's basically what we got in the finals here. And I'm just going to pick the winner based on accessibility and ease. And when you do that, it's a lot easier just to go to the display case and pick out whatever Patek you want, as opposed to going into a catalog and going and seeing if they have the Rolex model that you want. Even though they say they do, it may not be as readily available as the ones right in the store, right in the display case, that you could pick any model, any brand, automatic, quartz, whatever the heck you want. It's right there. The number one watch brand currently in Chinatown of 2025 is Patek Philippe. It is not Rolex, it is Patek Philippe. And one of the reasons is because Rolex has cracked down of their rates. So because of that, Patek is left the winner of the 2025 Chinatown March Madness bracket. Thank you for joining me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I am your host, Drew Pizzulo, and I will be back on the next episode of Watch Out.